It's the nameless protagonist. That's the one in the chat if you guys are able to hear me. Excellent. 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 We'll go ahead and get started then. Firstly, to the founders of the space, wos, to the dojo, wos. Those of you in the chat, those of you who are in the playback, wos. This is the nameless protagonist. I'm glad you guys could join me for this impromptu stream. This is going to follow the open dojo format. We've got Gold Professor saying that I sound a little bit muffled. Is it easier to hear me now or more difficult? Still sound the same? I can increase the gain a little bit and see if that helps some. Okay, we've got some more messages coming in saying it sounds pretty clear. Excellent. Well, like I said, if you peep the description, link is already in the description there for you. This is going to follow the open dojo the open dojo format we did before. So this is generally a chop-up session. I've got a little bit of an outline of some points I want to talk about, but primarily I just kind of want to open this up and just have a general chop-up session and kind of speak a little bit about what's been going on in my head lately, given the current events and what's gone down. Let's see. So the overall concept I want to talk about is this idea of Yin-Yang, or the Yin-Yang, if you're familiar with that. Most of you are. And I want to dig into two primary concepts. The first being this idea that seems to be floating around lately that I tend to want to describe as toxic positivity. And I don't want to demonize this concept because at its core, I believe it serves as a coping mechanism for people to deal with reality and to have a different perspective on addressing denial. I think in this prosperity preaching age, it is difficult for people to cope with negativity, especially when negativity reveals itself raw and in its unforgiving form. And people can have very good intentions when they present this positive, or rather toxic positivity. And it can be rather frustrating because at the end of the day, it still serves as a hindrance to problem solving. However, it does allow for you to cope in most instances. But oftentimes, that toxic positivity can create more problems than it actually solves. Given that it is a general accepted coping mechanism, it's almost indistinguishable from optimism. This can be a little bit difficult. The second point I want to talk about today is going to be what I describe as the negative, or rather, the benevolent shadow. This idea can be embodied in the concept of positive toxicity. Positive toxicity. And I think many in this space are a little bit more familiar with this idea as a measure of realism applied to any situation is an excellent tool to curb delusion. In both of these instances, it is easy to take both of these concepts entirely too far. And I think finding that balance between it within your mind, within the context of the situation you find yourself, is key for these modalities of coping to either be a useful modality of action or a tremendous hindrance. Before I get started, we'll go ahead and make some acknowledgments of folks that are in the chat already. We've got the cynical optimist, Hewa and Os. Glad you can make it, fam. Amusingly, though, your name is very aptly appropriate for today's topic of discussion. We've got Spainman, Os. Glad you can make it, fam. J. Cleveland Green II. Glad you can make it today, family. Os. And here we have Chief Mike's round table. Os. Yeah, I've seen you in a lot of the comments section. I'm glad you were able to make a live stream today as well, fam. Hopefully this will be the first of many to come. We've got the Gold Professor. Os, he says, what's happening, family? Gold P, I appreciate that video you did still, man. I like how you remix that. So feel free to go ham on my whole channel. I don't mind. And the intro that you put towards that was very appropriate to the concept that I was describing. And I just found it interesting how that video you did tended to recur and rear its head as a theme all throughout the rest of this week with regards to many topics of discussion that have been sprouting up lately. Good use of intuition. We got T. Os, glad you can make it. AB Media 83. Os, glad you could be here. Artisan MC. Scorpio in Crime. Glad you could make it, fam. Os. We got VJ. Glad I can hear you. Os. I'm listening. Peace. Os. Detroit 313. Os. Let's see. Is that everybody here? We got Green Gorilla. Glad you could make it, fam. That's a nice surprise. Os. Peace to you, fam. Let's see, Josh Morongo, my fault, fam. Os. I think this is your first time here. Glad you can make it. Got the Roger Report live. Os. Good to see you, fam. And we've got Abuki Cabal. What's going on, family? Salute. Os. All right, I think I've got everybody. So, again, this was more of an impromptu schedule. I had a situation that happened today, so I found myself with some free time today. So I decided to go ahead and open up the dojo. We got a couple more here. James Keels, salute. Os. Deshaun, os. Glad you can make it. And as I stated, the link to the live stream is in the description. So you guys are free to join whenever you like and chime in on the topic as we continue on. Let's see. We will begin here with an axiom that was very important to me coming up and practicing Ninpo. As many of you know now, I'm a practitioner of Togakure-ryu Ninjutsu, known now as the Bujinkan Association. And it gave me a serious introduction to many of the arts of Ninpo or ninjutsu as it relates to the Iga traditions. As we know, many of this body of work is nothing more than the shadow of many of the Budo or Bushin or samurai arts. They were, in other words, a way of life. Much of ninjutsu really relegates itself to esoteric teaching and philosophy, inspired very heavily by this idea of the Tao or the way. I want to, in the future, cover a little bit more of some of these concepts because they share a kinship with a lot of African thought. And the kinship that they share, I think, is an excellent counterculture to what we experience in the West in general, with regards to looking at things a little bit more nuanced and getting away from this idea of relying so heavily on greater than and lesser than values of things that we experience in the real world. Because I guess it's my subjective opinion that we as human beings are both static things that are part of the universe while simultaneously and almost paradoxically an ongoing event. This idea of being as a continuous process. Our evolution, even to the universe, this idea that we are an ongoing story that hasn't reached its zenith yet. That we're always redefining ourselves, adapting, while at our core, we're the same as we were millions of years ago. It's an interesting way to experience the world around us. And in the confines of modernity and modern thought, it's very easy to find ourselves in this trap of objectifying reality, making everything some measure of lesser than or greater than value relative to whatever interests that would pertain towards your idea of progress, whatever that even translates to. It's very easy to get lost in this idea in solidifying something, and in trying to understand something, you break it down to a bunch of parts that are essentially incoherent, until you take a step back and realize what you're looking at is a living part of the world around you. And if you want to understand it, it's best to observe its role in nature rather than dissect it. A very popular axiom in my ninjutsu ryu, I first heard from Soke Masaki Hasumi. He states, ninja travel in darkness because they carry with them their own inner light. I understood that to mean, as I continued to listen to Soke, that this inner light that's being described and talked about, in a sense, is the superposition between the darkness and the light, and that is truth, or what we call the primordial shadow. It is a thing that is both neither a part of, but a consequence of darkness and light existing in the first place. After all, once a light is cast, it's through those shadows that you come to understand the context of darkness. But the moment that light disappears, the shadow loses all context of itself. It is a median, an understanding of reality, a truth. There's a word for this that I really like, that it's considered a virtue in Budo, or the samurai arts, and that is Makoto. This concept of Makoto can, in many ways, simply be another word for sincerity or truth. It's rooted in the idea of having a resolute acceptance of reality, irrespective of what transpires. It's in this way that when you have a resolute understanding and acceptance of the truth, that you can find yourself within that darkness and still not be lost, because you've an internal locus of light that can still show you the way and trajectory of where you need to go. In turn, you find a balance. There is no superimposition of thought or idea. You are simply what you are, or in more popular terms, it is what it is. But this was an important axiom for many individuals that would have practiced the arts of the shinobi. Because, as stated, your objective is to infiltrate enemy territory, observe the enemy, and find ways that you can record the information accurately and report back to your lord. This can look like many ways. It can adopt many ideologies, concepts, and tactics. It could involve infiltrating at night, observing from afar, observing in broad daylight, donning a disguise, creating a modality of subterfuge, doing things that would challenge an individual's sense of honor, at least in the traditional or contemporary sense at the time. It's for this reason, only people of very great character that could endure through struggle, which ironically is another interpretation for the kanji for shinobi or ninja, to endure. It would take having an understanding of light and dark. Because there's a very interesting tendency for people to follow within. There's a secondary axiom that goes along with this, which is one can be blinded by both darkness and by light. This darkness oftentimes finds itself animated in a kind of despair, to be so rooted in the negativity around you that you can't move or see anything. You don't see a purpose in anything. Nihilism oftentimes is spoken about in a philosophical sense to almost represents this idea of being blinded by darkness. The truth can, in some instances, be so heavy that you find yourself grounded in it and you just sink into a kind of abyss. There's obviously a warning against this. It's very common, especially with Western tropes, to very readily identify this darkness and find it synonymous with so many concepts associated and related to negativity and evil. But that's not the only way you can be blinded. Oftentimes, because there's this over-preference, this overzealousness of repudiating darkness, that you can find yourself in a light that is so bright that you're still blinded. What can be worse in these situations is the hypocritical nature that many people seem to prefer or disregard the fact that whether it be by darkness or by light, they're still blind. Yet there will be a preference of being blinded by the light instead of the darkness. It's almost paradoxical in a sense. And in some instances, that blindness, that zealotness can be rewarded. It is a very strange phenomenon. Either way, the axiom warns against one individual being blinded either way. And in this understanding, it shows the value of shadows. This is generally relegated to the school of thought known as Inyo, or the Yin-Yang. Inyo Jitsu, understanding the way of darkness and light. There are many esoteric applications of it, and there's very practical applications of it. From learning how to meld into the cover of darkness, to learning how to use your blade and sword to reflect light to blind opponents in practical combat scenarios, or even in practical swordsmanship and manipulation of sunlight. Either way, the lesson in it is that there is no greater than or lesser than. Darkness and light are merely expressions of reality. And to apply with this polarity some sort of implied value, even if it's culturally appropriated, is an exercise of losing touch of reality. And it could cause you to favor very toxic areas of not only your personality, but worldview, and it can distort your implicit bias and implicit association with those around you. Dr. Francis Cress-Welsing and Dr. Marimba Aini go into great detail, elaborating this with many contemporary conversations as it pertains to white supremacy, for example. There are many articles and points of research that delve very deep into implicit bias and how we ascribe value to things predicated on presupposition, how on a subconscious level, they almost primordially break down to this idea of darkness and light. It's a very primal thing to do this, and it's very much so in our base nature. Even when you break into Jungian psychology, you see it expressed in understanding the shadow of the mind, or the less favored cognitive functions within your stack. Meaning those aspects of how you relate to yourself and the world around you. Those parts of yourself that are less liable to be accepted because you don't view them as virtuous. An over-preference in the things that you're good at, leaving you very lopsided and ill-equipped to deal with the many scenarios reality may face you with. It's in this way that getting rid of this idea of greater than or lesser than values, predicated exclusively on darkness and light, really only hinder you. But they give rise to the next points that we'll be getting into in general here. But remember, as a guide, this word Makoto is a profoundly useful tool in helping us navigate around this. Truth and sincerity. In other words, being honest with oneself, absolutely and resolutely. It is, unfortunately, the only thing you can do, since it's not something anyone else can do for you. They can offer you their perspective, but only you know if you're being truthful with yourself. And that's the only way you're going to learn the difference between these two nuances we'll be covering today. But I will put a quick link in the chat so you guys can take a look at this word. Makoto. All right, we got somebody that came up. But before we do that, we'll go ahead and make some acknowledgments in the chat real quick, since we got some new folks that came in. All right. All right, we got Colt Vaughn. Appreciate you coming through, fam. Us. Let me get you on. Streamlabs, we're lagging a little bit. There you are. Appreciate you, fam. Definitely leave any comments if you see anything that caught your attention. Constructive consultant. Os. He says, what's good, protagonist? I'm good, family. Just out here enjoying this little time home early today. We've got Asada Muhammad. Os. And Salamu Alaikum. Also, I've got a video incoming for you, or rather a live stream. I didn't forget what you asked me a while ago. I will be covering that. And I decided, since I'm going to be talking about it, I'm going to cover it entirely. I'll be going over food/fitness and kind of going into my method in a little bit more detail. So hopefully folks will be able to derive some value out of that. Let's see. I think we've got someone else came in. Dave Tao. Os, see you, fam. Yeah, and again, salute again to Gigi, man. Gigi's been holding it down. And definitely appreciate that music channel he has up. If you guys haven't seen that yet, you definitely want to get that on your save file so you can have that kind of playing in the background. He's got some nice lo-fi going. He's got some great instrumentals that he makes from scratch as well. So definitely peep his work. We got Coltrane's Law. Os, glad you can make it, family. Let's see. We got Queen the Sunkiss. Good evening, Os. Ray Hanma. I don't think I got you earlier. Os, glad you can make it, fam. Oh, and yeah, mods. Yeah, don't hesitate. Don't worry about that. I appreciate you guys sniping them. It doesn't really show up very clearly on StreamYards or Streamlabs. So if I'm slow on getting it, that's definitely why. Got Chaos Rain. Os, glad you can make it, fam. Baraborn. Ruminating on the dichotomy of good and evil is the privilege of those who are alienated from nature. Indeed. Indeed. But I would say that is pretty much the SOP of the modern world. I guess as a substitute for actually having to deal with nature, it'll just ascribe positive and negative value to things and then go from there. It's a nice little shortcut. Cuts out a lot of critical thinking. We have Gyogami. Mbute Mpungi friend. Os. Says I'm a regular on his lo-fi called. Yeah, fam. His channel be on time sometimes, man. Definitely was a good stream Sunday. Artisan got katanas out. Us. Most definitely. Colt Vaughn says it's better to learn about life and reality during this great awakening versus the BS. I mean, it's there. You just got to open your eyes and see. So I think I'm caught up. Josh asked the question, would this topic fall under integrating the shadow? It's a part of that. It's definitely a part of that. It's part of the work, because without honesty, you can't get into that shadow work. It's definitely something I advise people get into. Community Solutions Pro 1. Haven't seen you in a while. Oh, glad you can make it. Nah, we're low-key getting started. I'm kind of taking my time a little bit, but we definitely have an open panel here, so check the description if you guys want to come up. No problem, fan. Says I'm listening while conducting the notes for my show. Absolutely. And before we get started, I want to make an acknowledgement. We got Artisan MC came through with the Cash App. He says, Os. I appreciate you, fam. All right. But we'll get into the next spot. Oh, I see what's happening. It didn't show me your message like that properly, Dalawasha. Os. But here we are. Topic number 1. Toxic positivity. And I want to borrow an image so you guys can have a bit of a visual. I will put it on the screen. Might as well. A nice, reasonable size one here. Here we go. Let's just run with that. You know what? This is even better. This is even better. Open a new tab. There we go. Perfect. And I'm going to share my screen. Window. Pull this out. All right. Can you guys see that? Well, I'm getting these bots today, man. Appreciate that, Gyogami. Okay. But the idea of toxic positivity obviously streams from this pattern here. You guys are very familiar with the idea of the yin-yang. So we are going to fundamentally break down some of these principles. It starts from this concept of the void or nothingness, giving rise to the fundamental understanding of one, this idea of yang, or yo, as it's understood in Japanese. Its polarity is generally considered positive, and it represents a masculine principle. And with the masculine principle with regards to this, the idea is that it's a flowing energy that applies direction. It's from there that we progress towards its opposite but equal. And we get the two. Taiji, or the yin, along with the yang, that primordial darkness. Thus, from the nothing, the primordial chaos, all united in one manifest. Then the one becomes two. This two here, particularly this dark area here, the yin, associated with negativity and is feminine in nature. Now, Western thought would give this idea that upper and lower signify some sort of rank or value with regards to each other. This idea of greater than and lesser than. Something can, by virtue of its posture, one being a master, one being a subject. There being values of something that are desirable and in others less desirable. In reality, they're nothing more than two aspects of the exact same thing you're looking at. This is something that oftentimes gets misappropriated when they're talking about some concepts of Eastern thought, because it can be misunderstood as though the two are the same. After all, if the only thing you're using to differentiate the two is color, then, it's easy to make the misunderstanding that they're equal. They are very unequal. They're different. But it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. And I think that's the critical nuance here. Yang, that positive energy, that yo energy, is simply that. The yin, that yin, that feminine, that tendency to absorb and receive. Doesn't mean lesser. It's just different. These form the building blocks of what we understand with regards to understanding the nature of things. This applies to ourselves. This applies to everything. If you want to look at it in the context of humanity, it's men and women constituting an entire whole that is humanity. One is not better than the other, but they are not the same. I think it's very easy to get lost in this understanding, which is unfortunate. But it leads us to the final modality here that I really want to highlight. Because it's in this final expression of the yin-yang or inyo, we see the true lesson that's being taught here. As you notice, within the yang energy, there is a principle of darkness that's intrinsic to it. Also, within the yin energy, there is an aspect of yang that is intrinsic to it. And it's here that we begin our understanding of toxic positivity. In this modality, that young yang or immature yang, or some would call it little yang, this is the essence of that toxic positivity. It is something that takes this concept of, irrespective of what has occurred, one can continue to move forward as though the issue is resolved. One can move forward brashly, giving direction even though the timing is off, giving direction even though the situation is wrong, giving direction even though there is not enough energy to actually do it. Action in the absence of wisdom. There is a component of denialism that's inherent within this. When one is impatient, when one has not cultivated the yang correctly, properly, with enough time, it's easy to want to move on from things, especially when they are difficult, especially when you are marred by darkness, when you're consumed by darkness. It is, in a way, an ultimate defiance of that reality. And remember what we said earlier about the need for that reality in order to continue to move forward, in order to maintain that balance, as we stated before. The absence of Makoto, or truth. The truth is, it's very easy to fall into this pattern of toxic positivity when you're in a position that is unfavorable, when something arises that you want completed quickly. And instead of taking the proper time to rush the situation or to understand it, you rush the situation instead. It's like trying to push forward in the grieving process, and out of fear of appearing to linger and dwell, you just rush ahead blindly, giving quick axioms like, well, you'd be happy you have such and such, or you could always have less. These things, while true and maybe animated by good intentions, are not taking the time to properly observe the negativity that has taken place. When you find yourself in these situations, it is absolutely best to take the time to create systems to solve the problem by taking absolute full measure of the negativity that's present there. If you don't take time to understand what's wrong, there's no way you'll find the proper time to actually take advantage and solve it. You may front load one presupposition with another. But in the essence of trying to smother a problem with positivity, that yin-yang, you may actually invite more opportunities for negativity to occur. And in fact, you might cause even more opportunity for it to take place. This yin-yang seems to manifest in the area where darkness is greatest. In the absence of balance, it shows itself at its most extreme form. It can either be something that provides an important realism, a light within the darkness, or when taken out of its element and applied incorrectly, it can be an invitation to permanent darkness, a pathway to despair. And if you don't feel the immediate effects of it, those around you will. There is an important lesson here that very much so, simply being positive for the sake of being positive can be the highest expression of ignorance and arrogance. Irrespective of your intention, if you do not take measure of the darkness and negativity around you and approach that negativity with the intention of understanding and as a result thusly solving the problem, you will get nowhere. And you will insult yourself and other people. Toxic positivity. But at the same time, like we said before, this harkens to the original axiom I put forward in the beginning, that ninja travel in darkness because they carry with them their own inner light. And that inner light is the truth. When that small yang is properly cultivated, when that small yang is doing what it's supposed to do, even if it is surrounded in the deepest of darkness, it can be what guides you out of a situation. And instead of ignorance, it can transmute into hope. This is why the idea of greater than or lesser than with regards to applying to this is absolutely useless. It's merely for you and your perspective to transnavigate whether or not this becomes toxic positivity or hope. Such is the difference between these two. This is the essence of the immature or Yin-Yang, the darkness within the light. Before I continue though, are there any questions on what we talked about so far? And like I said, the link is in the description. Go ahead and put it out in the chat for you guys if you can't see it. And again, this is an open dojo, so you guys are welcome to join anytime. Let's see. We've got... All right, Rael came through. Os, glad you can make it, fam. But that is toxic positivity. And of course, there's another side to that. Let's see. Josh Morongo says, I always viewed being positively consistently as building stoicism and toughness. Now, that's not to be confused with a measure of optimism and having a, in general, healthy outlook. But the key to it all, and again, there's a subtlety here, it's subtle, is to not use the positivity as an excuse to not face the negative. That's the key. When you're presenting the positive as a substitute for acknowledging and understanding the nature of the negative, especially as a tool to try to ignore the problem rather than solve it, that's where you run that risk. And the key is legitimate problems, things that truly are getting in the way of something you may want to solve. And this can be expressed in a micro and a macro sense. But more oftentimes, these are issues that we have within ourselves that we choose to ignore, or they could be issues even sprouting about in the place that you live in. It could be a phenomenon that's taken over many people, negatively affected. But in failing to investigate the true nature and origin of these things, by simply saying you could ignore it, cope with it, deal with it, that's true. But it doesn't necessarily solve the issue. And so more and more people succumb to the negative of the scenario, and then what? You're now left with a much bigger problem. This problem that sprouted from something everybody, quote, should have been able to ignore, end quote, and it gets worse. This is how toxic positivity creates, in the long run, more problems than it solves. For the individual, dealing with your own shadow, aspects of yourself that you repress, which is generally what happens, trying to force your way through something, and this idea of, I've done it once, I can do it again, without the investigation of what's actually wrong. Oftentimes, the situation gets worse and worse, and it will find another way to express itself negatively. This is the spirit I'm describing. Like we said, it is subtle. Unfortunately, once more, I think it's something that gets abused, particularly in this modern society, because we look favorable on positivity. But we oftentimes, purely because there may be a high volume of negativity, don't give enough time to truly investigate the nature of where this negativity comes from. We just make presuppositions on its origin and state that, well, it didn't affect me, so it shouldn't affect you. At least not to that extent. And if it does, then you're weak. And while that may have some measure of fact to it, if again the issue is so widespread that the overwhelming majority are experiencing it and are agreeing to go through a collective denialism, it's only asking for more problems into the future. It's worth taking your energy and investigating the nature of the negativity, not giving into it, not saying that it is greater than you are, but to understand it. Because it's only in that aspect of you understanding it that you can then properly apply that positivity. Remember, it's when you're in the deepest part of that darkness, the deepest part of that negativity, that positivity can then find its greatest use. It's the reason why it's not up here, but down here where the darkness is deepest. This is the idea. Ryle says, most times solving the problem really means embracing a new form of consciousness. In our group, we focus a lot on people who fail, which is a distraction. Many people fear success. There's folks who can be very comfortable in that darkness as well. I think that may, in and of itself, be a form of coping mechanism. We talk a little bit about that when we get into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, also, and looking at how sometimes people create their own problems so that they can be in a state of perpetually trying to solve them because the act of trying is the only form of progress they know. Ryle further states, people don't just fear failure. The reason why so many people are apathetic is because it's a lazy way to say it's someone else's fault they failed. Indeed, that is a textbook example of projection oftentimes. And because it's so simple, oftentimes it's utilized more than it likely should be or needs to be. Toya states light can only be appreciated amongst the shadow. I mean, if you're surrounded by other lights that are way brighter, oftentimes you have no idea where your value resides. Definitely agree with that. I appreciate the darkness. I harness it to truly bask in my light. And we are about to head right there, Toya. She's right there on the next part of this topic. My experience has been the opposite. Positivity is viewed as cope, end quote, while nihilism and negativity are heavily leaned into and embraced openly. In the beginning, I'll read your second part as well. It's almost taboo to be positive and have a deterministic view of the future. You know, this is why I listed that axiom in the very beginning about how there are individuals who will find themselves blinded by darkness. And the inverse and opposite being individuals blinded by light. It's unfortunate because for many, they get so lost in that darkness and that keyword nihilism, because I think there's many ways of expressing that nihilism and understanding and relating to it. They get so comfortable with that darkness that it's all they know. They stay in this second iteration right here. They don't ever get that Yin-Yang to properly manifest and show that light because they will refuse to accept the reality of what is, i.e. the truth. Going back to that word we said before, Makoto. It's an unfortunate thing, though. It's just being blinded by light is generally seen as more noble. Ray Hanma says, those who are comfortable in darkness can't help but to desire to drag others into that darkness. Yeah, that idea of misery loves company, I think is really true. One of the downsides of being animated by that principle, especially if fear brought you there, is you have to feed off of the suffering, some sort of stimulation from other people, whether it be emotional or otherwise. It's a big reason why others need to be there, because it's not self-sustaining. It is a constant drain. To me, that's red flag to say that you were never supposed to be there in the first place like that. But I digress. Well, we can jump to this next portion here. This is kind of getting into what we were starting to speak on, what Toya talked about. This idea of yang, yin. I describe it as the benevolent shadow or positive toxicity. The inverse, the toxic positivity. Yang yin serves as a grounding force to keep one from being blinded by their own light. It is a voice of criticism, which serves as a balancing modality, which keeps one from losing touch with reality. I think this is probably one of the most critical aspects to surviving in this modern iteration that we experience now, especially in the Edo social complex. Because for many, harnessing this principle is the only way they make it out. It's one thing to say that, yes, you need a measure of self-honesty when you choose to walk into the light, when you choose to do things that are classified and considered positive. But again, that aspect of truth, that ability to criticize your actions, the ability to question what you are, not to the point of paralysis, but to the point of keeping that forward momentum in check, to remain measured, to not overexpress that light to where you outshine others around you. I think it can be one of the greatest challenges, learning how to cultivate this depending on your upbringing, depending on your general mind state. For me, I was forced to deal with this part right here at a very early age, but it wasn't until I got a lot older that I learned about how to really harness this here. Many people see this as an evil thing. They see it as, ironically, like the way we look at toxic positivity. It is, in general, simply called toxicity in most instances. And while it can express itself with regards to that, when you're surrounded in an area where everything is, I'm going to say, blindly cohesive, that darkness and the light serves as a true counterbalance to keep you from being blinded. It is a part of what you are, that resolute self-acceptance, that can oftentimes be a weapon that defends you. I really like how this simple symbol carries with it such potent reminders of this principle. So much so that you can see how it can apply to everyday conversation, not just with self-introspection, but with regular discourse. I think this is something to truly keep in mind when we have these conversations in these spaces. That positive toxicity can be a proper way by which we can measure our ideas and understanding, as long as it's kept within balance and respectful. I think, again, trust is paramount here, which we know comes at a premium in the Edo social complex. But I think we cause ourselves more harm in the absence of this, because this is one of the only ways we can figure out if we're on track. Maybe it's fear of being corrected, fear of being wrong, because there is consequences to that for us, especially when we come up as part of a demographic that's not allowed to make mistakes. Maybe that's a kind of pathology we've adopted, to where we fall back into the defensive form of this and we just become toxic. But a kind of healthy cynicism, a skeptical optimism, or even a cynical optimism, it can go a long way in counterbalancing the conversation and bring us to a proper point where we can properly hear each other out, properly extract information, find what our weaknesses are in our conversation, bolster it, and grow. It reminds me of that axiom that is said sometimes, steel sharpens steel. I do appreciate that. But that's how it happens. It reminds me of the way katanas are forged. In general, there are two types of steel. On the onset, the part that forms the cutting blade, the cutting edge, is made from a harder steel. It's folded just as much, but it's reinforced on the other side by a softer steel. That softer steel on the opposite side, the non-cutting portion of the blade, serves as a way to provide not only flexibility, but for the potential for the blade to adapt when it meets resistance. So even though technically it would be better to cut if it were thoroughly made from the same material through and through, but with having a harder outer core and a softer inner core, it is able to properly endure through real function. Our psychology and our discourse follow a similar principle. I think if we can respect these two energies and understand that it is not a matter of one being greater than the other, but they just being different aspects of the same thing, we can find much greater use out of these principles, out of this discourse, out of this conversation that we've been having in this space for many years now, as well as in our everyday lives with relation to ourselves and our own introspection. I want to conclude with a metaphor to describe these two principles that I heard once that I really like, because I believe they capture the essence of what we're talking about here. It was once questioned, while these two things are profoundly different, they are very much alike in the same thing. That is the way of the ocean and the way of the sky. These two things are fundamentally night and day, but irrevocably interconnected with each other through the border. When you reach the ocean's surface, that is where the sky begins. Below there is water and various aquarious life, sharks, fish, whales, all swimming as if they're in their own way flying. So too is the ocean to the sky, with its myriad of birds that soar to and through the clouds towards any measure of reality. Yet and still, they all share that same border. What is truly the difference between the ocean and the sky? Harkening back to the idea of yin and yang, the yin-yang, with old yang, young yang, old yin and young yin, flowing constantly with one another. So too can the bird in the sky delve into the ocean. And for some, those in the ocean, so too can they fly into the air from the ocean's surface. These two things are very different, but in so many ways they are exactly the same. It is in this understanding that we can learn the interconnectedness between two things being very different, but part of the same aggregate. It's in this way that I've come to understand the difference of energies and polarity. This is the masculine and the feminine, that which gives direction and that which receives. There is no greater than or lesser than. There's only difference. And the medium that unites it all is resolute acceptance of reality and truth. In this way, I find it very, very useful and beneficial, and is a good reminder when we're having conversations out in the space and we meet differences with each other. The rules of the ocean and the rules of the sky may differ, but they share the same purpose. And ultimately, they all take place and are paramount on the same earth. If we can respect those differences, I think it'll be very easy, or we will run less of a risk of creating problems, more problems than we actually solve. So if it helps, definitely take a snapshot of this image and let it serve as a reminder in the future. To that axiom, ninja travel in darkness because they carry with them their own inner light. And that inner light is their truth and acceptance of reality. We'll go ahead and take a look at some more of your comments that you have here. And I'll drop the link once again. You guys are definitely free to come up. Let's see if I missed any messages. Let's see, we got... Right, he said that already. Those who are comfortable in darkness can't help but desire to drag up. Yep, we've talked about that. Josh says the Bible talks about being wise like a servant, but gentle as doves. You know, that whole idea of wisdom just takes time, fam. Takes time to acquire that. It's not an easy thing. You need that honesty as part of the formula as well. Yep, you can be blinded by light or blinded by darkness. The decision is yours. It indeed is. I advise on avoiding either one of those. This is why rites of passage for boys were so important, because a boy could carry his mother's fears into his adulthood and make him worthless because he couldn't face life the way he needed to. And that ritual is probably one of the most critical things that have gone missing, because all people have done is tried to act in addressing the fear modality, and they haven't been taught how to do it. They don't see illustrations on doing it. It's a frustrating thing. Got Jenna LF. Glad you can make it. We don't realize that much of our life's trajectory is formulated in childhood for good or bad. Childhood is where you're either taught to embrace life or fear life. It doesn't help that the media has a great preference for the latter portion and makes a lot of its money pushing people in that direction. It's a pretty sick thing to see. Got Mulatto Vanguard. What's going on, fam? Let's see. Wow, says we have a group where many old people have taught younger generations to fear life. This is betrayal, because old people should instill the light of the youth through their own fears and failures. I think a big portion of that comes from the fact that in our traditions, there was supposed to be an initiation into eldership. And with their being closer to the ancestors, they were supposed to instill that wisdom that they've acquired to the younger generation who just came from the ancestors as well. And in that ritual of eldership, and they're being the gatekeepers to the ritual of childhood, the cycle was supposed to continue. Somewhere, that line was cut and interrupted, and we're seeing the effects of it. Artisan, I 100% co-sign, and I think that's a Scorpio lesson that folks have to learn real quick. See, Charlemonger's framework is really dope. Short-term pessimism, long-term optimism. Well, I think that's just being pragmatic. Got Carl George that came in. Oops. But that was pretty much what I wanted to chop it up, fam. Let's see. Riles says, yes, elderhood is something you're initiated into as well. It's a book I'm about to get into on this. Yeah, I think that'd be a good thing to really start covering, because really just the whole idea of initiation is just out the window at this point. And we've got a lot of people that want to try to rebuild the community, but there are a lot of portions that were missing from the very beginning. So if it's missing, then there's no really any rebuilding. There just needs to be building to be done if they're serious about it. And it needs to be a full scale thing, not this triage treatment that's going on right now. I don't think you can half-ass rebuilding a civilization, let alone a culture. Indeed, Artisan. Says it was cut when they stopped respecting elders. And that was a byproduct of not respecting each other in general. But that was everything I wanted to cover. If no one's wanting to come up, then we can definitely close out. Oh, we do got Rael coming up here. Oh, you can come back if you like, fam. Still got a little time. Let's see if I missed any more in the chat. All right. He disconnected again. I'll see if he comes back. But yeah, let me know if you guys like having these more esoteric talks. I know there's been some whispers in the streets about wanting to see more of these put together, so thought I'd give a nod to it. Oh, we got another Cash App that came in. Ibo Sosa says, for the enlightenment. Os, I appreciate that, fam. Sorry I didn't catch that till just now. But yeah, let me know if you guys want to get more into these esoteric conversations. There's way more I can get into. And Gyogami, if you can, please send me an email, because I want to have that conversation that we've been speaking on. And I want to try to coordinate whenever you're free again. And we can really go into detail and break that conversation down as it pertains to the fourth industrial complex and what I've been covering with hive theory. Really want to address that dichotomy between initiation and synchronicity, because I think it's an underplayed topic. But I find that there's quite a few people that are interested in the idea. Quite a few. But with that said, I'll go ahead and close up the dojo. I definitely appreciate you guys coming through, as I said before. And we'll see if we get any more of these, but we've got one more sword form to finish up. That'll be sword form 7. And I'll be planning on going into more detail on hive theory. There's a lot more information that's come out lately, such as progression on a lot of this technology. And I'm going to see what I can do to reach out to Dr. Nicole Ali and maybe a few others, and we can revisit transhumanism, because there's a lot of new developments that have come forward, and I definitely like to start talking a bit more about it, especially in the field of genetic engineering of CRISPR. And as you know, that she's a genetic engineer, so that's her job. She works with this technology. So it's really good getting some insider conversation and hearing about what her constituents are looking at as far as policy is concerned. And I will definitely be getting into the ethics conversation again with regards to that, and talking about how civil rights is being employed already to have the transhumanist conversation. And a lot of what you're experiencing with I'm going to call them the Decepticons, how a lot of that language is spilling over into the way they're trying to adapt laws. This is already an international conversation. And the transhumanist community, which comprises of quite a few people, quite a few interesting people, are already adopting a posture with regards to that. And you may be very interested in hearing the way they're talking, because I think it's shaping and pulling strings on certain conversations we see about family now, more so than you realize. And it should be of concern to you, since many of the laws that they'll be using for this are laws that were intended for us during the Reconstruction era, being retrofitted for computers, AI, and individuals that may be classified as human plus. It may explain why this idea of sex and gender are seen as mutable, because they very may well be in the very near future. Rael just hopped up. We'll see if it works again. Rael, does it seem like
Can you hear me?
respect? Yes, I can hear you. Os, what's good, fam? Still there? His connection may have gotten him again.
Can you hear me?
I think I can now. Go ahead and give it a shot.
I can hear you.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you fine, fam. Seems like he cut off again. Yeah, his internet seems to not want to cooperate today. But that's fine. I can catch you on the next one, fam. Let's try it. How about now?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Ooh. Peace, man. Also.
What's going on with you today, family?
Man, this is crazy. Can you hear me?
Yes, you do sound a bit muffled and far away, though.
Hold on. Let me switch off of this. Let me switch my Bluetooth. What about now?
Okay, the quality went up.
Okay. I took my Bluetooth out.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, I piece of the chat. I really been trying to impress upon people this rites of passage thing, man. And you know, when I was just reading up on it, just reading up on the fact that even as an elder, there's an initiation process to being an elder too. And I just thought that was very interesting to see because too many times we see um, in our particular group so many older uh, black people who just really get over with this notion of I'm older than you, therefore I know more about life than you do. So, like for example, I was born in the late '70s, so I, you know, the crack era, like I went through that, like a lot of people did. Like if you survived the crack era, man, you you went through some stuff, man. Like, cause the '80s were no joke, and '90s too, and so that's going to give you a certain level of perspective. Um, and so this notion that just because you're you know you're in your 60s or your 70s and you're just full of wisdom, you're just brimming with wisdom, is one of the most farcical shit that I've ever seen, because that's not true. um, we have all seen inside of our families, outside of our families, a lot of old dumb black people that exist. And so when you tie it into this initiation piece, you really get to see that manhood and womanhood, masculinity and femininity, is something that was carefully constructed. It wasn't an accidental thing. It was something that people took a great care and concern in ensuring that you develop properly. They didn't focus on developing you when you became biologically an adult. They made sure that they set the foundations to this pattern of behavior at a young age so it could take root. And so, you know, when people just try to just take on this mantle that I'm an elder just because I'm older than you, that's honestly that's quite arrogant. Um, and so I think that we really need to really understand. When we did the stream on masculinity and how it was developed, one of the most important things that talked about in that was how important elder leadership is into the initiation process. So, because you'll have a lot of times older people lamenting how wayward the youth are and things like that, but you don't see them being elders themselves. So they'll point the finger at the young people that they didn't actually help become, uh, you know, uh, proper men and proper women. So I think that's just something that we really need to really hone in on. Um, and to me, elder doesn't really signify age. To me, being an elder is centered around wisdom. You could be 35 and wise, and you could be 65 old and dumb. It's just about the perspective. And I think that people really need to take that into consideration before they start, you know, following just old people just for following somebody old's sake. You know, a lot of times people, especially in that group, especially when they come for a father figure and somebody older, and you just need to be very careful in who you decide to just give that title to, because many of these types of people will use that title to manipulate you. So you just have to be very careful.
Yeah, I see that happening in the sisterhood quite a bit. There's a lot of individuals that really go forward with the, I guess, motherhood modality. And since it's so calibrated to a lot of gynocratic principles, it's very easy to just simply equate age to wisdom. I mean, it's only natural to do it. I think when you observe people in their element, they show you who they are, and it's easy to see who's deserving of that title and who's not. But in the absence of these rituals, for the most part in the modern era, they're largely absent for the majority of people, especially in the Edo social complex, but in particular those who are at a certain point within their cultural expression. So folks in the upper class have different forms of this, but other peoples that may be in the lower tier don't always push forward with this understanding. And so they suffer a lot of the same problems. And it's ironic that you can go to these third world countries, or you can go to places where these rituals were kept more intact and more readily derive that wisdom from individuals that are elders, even if they may not be in the best position economically. There's still certain things that you can learn. And again, the pattern that I observe is that the majority of the elders spent most time with the children. And while that may be true to a certain extent, I'll say the crack era ran a number on our demographic, and it really set us back with regards to our ability to affect that pattern of cultural continuity. And it's left us doing a lot of multiplying by zero, which is very unfortunate.
Well, I think that these conversations obviously are really important. I've been working on this presentation that's going to be dealing with femininity and how femininity is developed. And the complexity of the world of girls and women, it is so complex, man. What goes on in that world, because women tend to develop through relationships. One of the I'm using one of these books. It's called Mean Girls, and it just is talking about how women, girls, because it's something that's really prevalent in girls, and then a lot of times they don't grow out of it into adulthood, and how they use relationships to hurt, and seeing the complexity of the different types of girls that are described. Like, you have your queen bees, you have your sidekicks, you have your bankers, you have different types of girls who exist in this particular world. And it's it's based on social stratification, that a girl could be considered a good girl, but she can navigate into bad roles in this world, depending on what type of group she's in at that particular moment. And so when you see this kind of behavior being taken into the adult world, where you see, adult females partaking in the type of behaviors you would see in elementary school and middle school and high school, that just proves that there's a deficit of wisdom being transferred to these younger females. Because when I was coming up, the elder women that I was around, they didn't allow younger females to get out of pocket. They got them in line quick. And it will be brutal sometimes, but it wasn't out of hate for them. It was out of love for them because they didn't want to see them grow up and be bad women. So, but when you see older women now celebrating younger females being bad women, I say it all the time. No wonder a lot of these females are so jacked up. All you got to do is look at the women in their family, primarily their mothers, their grandmothers, or aunts, older sisters, older cousins, stuff like that. That whole world is so complex that we really, as a collective, man, really don't truly understand what a lot of the infighting is amongst these females in this world, and as it pertains to how they interact with us as well. Because they not only antagonize each other, but they'll try to bring that to men, and that's when you start having really a lot of conflict with these types of females. But this initiation aspect is so impactful in terms of psyche development. Like, it's like you just cannot understate and undervalue and diminish how important this process really is, because to me, this process truly sets the stage for what kind of psychology you're going to be oriented into as an adult biologically, and your psychic development is supposed to be advanced during your initiation process. It's supposed to speed up your development from a psychic perspective. So it didn't matter if you was 15 years old, you were considered a man and a woman once you went through initiation, psychically. So, and obviously we don't have that here.
Which is unfortunate. And, it's just one of those casualties of the modern era where, for the sake of efficiency and proficiency, a lot of these things were just seen as superstition. And it's insane because even when you get into things like the subtle, like psychic concepts, what they're learning about with regards to things like meditation is profound, because they're seeing that there's real tangible results from doing these things now that they have the technology to actually acknowledge it and measure it. So who knows what else has been pretty much left by the wayside, because for the sake of progress, it was deemed unnecessary and as a burden by some. And now they're finding that there's just too many aspects of our psychology that thrived and required these kinds of things. And now that they're not there, they're experiencing the void. And people are looking for ways of trying to fill that emptiness. And oftentimes they're being met with just infinite potential for dopamine hits, whether it be from this modality of technology or that. I see it being the new model going forward. And it's sad because I don't see there being a return to this. I do see the potential for a pseudo initiation into it, which may create more problems than it solves when it's all said and done.
I think it's going to be more of an individual-based, resource-based type of phenomenon. When we did in Complex did the masculinity stream, I referenced an international NGO that put out a study on how the lack of initiation globally is affecting people.
Oh yeah, it's deaded the ability to go back and forth, with relationship building and family building in particular.
Right, because that's what those initiation rituals were all about: continuity of family structures, And so the fact that an international organization felt the need to address it it completely refutes anybody's notions that the adults that before us did such a great job. I mean, if anything, I mean, I'm Generation X, so much of the back and forth that we see in society, the origins is coming from people older than us. So it's like, and one of the main reasons why we see that is because that generation, as far as boomers, really took a step back from concept that silent generation put forth, more family-oriented concepts. Whereas, I mean, boomers are known as the me generation, so much more of an individualistic based generation. So, and it's funny because generations like ours, if you've ever spent any time around your grandparents, or anything like that, a lot of us harken back to those times with them because of what we got from them. If you got anything good, like even when it comes to black women, especially I don't know what generation you are, but I'm Generation X. So
I'm on the cusp of that as a millennial.
okay, so you okay. So even if you dealt with deal with an ADOS woman, what separates her, especially if she's Generation X or younger, if she had any connection with a grandmother that was good, because typically, in my experiences, those women tend to have much more of a connection and were closer to their grandmothers than their own mothers. And it's specifically because of the wisdom that those grandmothers possess. I've known plenty of females who said that they were closer to their grandmother than they were to their mother because their mother represented all the opposite goodness that their grandmothers possessed. And they took to that. So even though they might have been under the tutelage of their mother in terms of her having control over them, they got a lot of good influence from the grandmother, which a lot of times would be have them at a place where you could kind of manage in a better fashion, trying to work with them. But if they didn't have that wisdom, it's there's no miraculous immaculate conception when it comes to proper initiation into masculinity and femininity. You don't just grow up and become biologically a male, and female, and just think that, oh, I'm older, I'm a man and I'm a woman now. It just doesn't work like that. You need somebody to show you how to do it. That's who we are as humans. Life within itself is an initiation within itself. That's what life is. So, but you need certain focused initiation to really truly show you what your roles are. And that's what many of the so-called primitive societies understood completely, that I got to take this boy from his mom at this age, because if I don't take him from his mom at this age, he's going to be a baby. He's going to be a baby boy. He's going to be a mama's boy, and he's going to be no good for a woman once he gets older and is able to marry. So we got to break this, and that's what they did, And so that's really, to me, I would say, one of the most pressing things, and especially in our group right now, you got so many black men who are not even interested in mentoring. You got a lot of black men who are not even willing to mentor young black boys because they're just tired of the BS from the women and so many. I got a homeboy that he had stopped coaching for a while because he was tired of the mothers. It was getting on his nerves. So you're already missing out if you don't have a father, and now you don't have the mentorship coming from men. Like, you're talking about a real significant problem on the horizon if these people don't get it together, man.
It's a big inspiration as to why I started Hive Theory in the first place, to kind of blow the whistle on some of that and draw attention to a lot of these things that are just being carved out without any rational thought as to the consequences down the line. And we're really facing a situation where we don't even understand what it means to be human fully, and people are already getting ready to throw it away. That concerns me. But let me go ahead and make some of these acknowledgments here, and we'll go ahead and wind down. Let's see, we got PK here. Oh, glad you can make it, fam. American Negro, good to see you again. Okay, yeah, you saw a statement. Yeah, definitely be looking out for that. Huh. Do you have the name of it? Okay, he just put it up there. Warriors of the Rainbow. Done deal. Yeah, I'll definitely keep that. But Rael, fam, thanks for coming up again and chopping it up as normal, man. We'll have to sit down and do something more specific one day. But today was just kind of, I had a little free time, so I just wanted to crack open the dojo real quick.
Yeah, it's just impromptu.
But with that said, fam, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Nah, man, go ahead and get him up out of here, man. Go ahead and get up out of here too.
All right, fam. With that said, to the founders of the space, us, to the dojo, us, and to the folks that are in the chat, thanks for coming. Us. It's been the Nameless Protagonist. You guys enjoy the rest of your day.